Civilization begins. I imagine someone said they had invented an amazing new mind-reading technology. This person claimed that their system could transfer the thoughts from your brain into the mind of someone else. It would work from thousands of miles away. You could even use the system to find out what they thought long after they were dead. Would you believe them? Amazingly, that technology really does exist, and believe it or not, it was invented more than 5,000 years ago. Here's how it works. you take a thought in your brain, convert it into a code, and put the code onto an object. Now you give the object to someone else who already knows the code. They read the code and hey presto, your thoughts are now inside their brain. This mind-reading technology is called writing. If you were imagining some kind of fancy ancient helmet with wires sticking out of it, you may feel a bit disappointed. Sorry about that. But many of the things we take for granted as ordinary today are extraordinary achievements developed in the ancient past. Writing is just that. No other creature on the planet can do it, only we humans. Technically, history begins with writing. It's what we learn about the past. It's what we learn about the past by reading what people have written down. Everything before it is prehistory or prehistoric. No one knows who invented writing. It is unlikely that any one person did. But from about 3400 BCE, we see the first clear use of written symbols. That's 1/10 of a second from midnight on our 24-hour clock. If you're wondering what the BCE stands for, it means before the Common Era. The Common Era begins at year 1. Anything before is BCE. Anything after is CE. For example, my dad was born in 1936 CE. Pharaoh Cleopatra, who we'll meet later on in this chapter, died in 30 BCE. We tend to leave the letters CE off dates with 4 numbers in them, such as 2018. Writing began with merchants in the Middle East who drew simple pictures on clay tablets to represent the things they were buying and selling. Next to each picture, they made marks for how many of these things changed hands. These tablets were baked in ovens to make their marks permanent, creating an unchangeable set of records. This meant that merchants could trade without losing track of what they had bought and sold. Over time, wedge-shaped marks replaced the pictures. This style of writing is called cuneiform, which means wedge-shaped. It forms the basis for 3 of the oldest written languages in the world: Sumerian, Assyrian, and Babylonian. Sumerian was an ancient civilization, or Sumeria was an ancient civilization in the south of Mesopotamia, a land in the heart of what is now Iraq. Experts believe the first writing appeared there. Sumeria grew up along 2 rivers called the Euphrates and the Tigris. Fresh water from these rivers meant that people could flood their fields, and that made the right conditions for their crops to thrive. The river valley also provided 2 long-flowing superhighways. People could use wooden boats to carry themselves and their goods from one riverside city to the next. We know a great deal about this very old civilization, in part thanks to an extraordinary discovery. It was the 1840s in England, and Austin Layard wasn't having any fun being a lawyer, so he decided to go on an adventure. He headed for the distant land of Ceylon, now Sri Lanka, off the southern tip of India. But he never got there. His trek took him through the Middle East, where he got very interested in archaeology, studying the remains of ancient civilizations. He worked on several important digs and even wrote a book. Then, about 10 years after he first left London, he decided to investigate a mound of earth across the Tigris River from the town of Mosul. The mound turned out to be the ancient Assyrian capital of Nineveh, which had been destroyed in 1612 BCE, or 612 BCE even. Layard and his team uncovered a giant palace. Even more important, they found a huge royal library. We call it the Library of Ashurbanipal, after the ruler who we think built it. It contained a staggering 30,000 clay tablets covered in cuneiform writing. These tablets have transformed our understanding of life in ancient Mesopotamia. The most famous tablets from the ancient library tell the adventures of Gilgamesh, an early Sumerian king. Gilgamesh had been a real-life king who ruled one of the first Sumerian cities called Uruk, located on the bank of the Euphrates River. Uruk was the largest city in the world at the time. As many as 80,000 people lived there. The Epic of Gilgamesh, probably first written down in about 2000 BCE, is a poetic fantasy. It tells the story of a character called Gilgamesh who was 2/3 god, 1/3 human. Gilgamesh goes on an epic journey in search of a way to live forever. It is the very first written work of fiction that we know of. But it isn't just writing that we owe to these creative people. They also loved maths. The Sumerian counting system was based on the number 60. It is a great number to base a math system on because there are so many ways to divide it. By 2, 3, 4, 5, 10, 12, 6, 15, 20, 30. It's thanks to the Sumerians that we have 60 seconds in a minute, 60 minutes in an hour, and 360 degrees in a circle. As if that weren't enough, these ingenious people came up with the most revolutionary invention of all time, the wheel. The first wheels we know about were potter's wheels used to make clay pots. These were invented in about 3500 BCE, around the same time as writing. By about 300 years later, Mesopotamians had wheeled chariots. Who made the leap from making pots with wheels to carrying pots on carts? We don't know. Like all civilizations, the Sumerian civilization didn't last forever. About 2200 BCE, a terrible drought lasting over 200 years devastated the region. Land around river mouths became impossible to farm because seawater made it too salty. And in a bid for survival, the Sumerian cities were fighting among themselves and with their neighbours. Finally, in 1787 BCE, Babylon conquered Sumeria and made it part of the Babylonian Empire. The Sumerians devised such useful tools, skills and techniques as the potter's wheel, the wagon wheel, the plough, the sailboat, the arch, the vault, the dome, casting in copper and bronze, riveting, brazing, and soldering and sculpture. Imagine you are a mighty ancient king and a genie pops out of a magic lamp. "You can have as many wishes as you want," says the spirit. How would you respond? Would you ask for all the money in the world? To be able to boss everyone around? Or how about some all-powerful magic ring that would make you live forever? History is full of stories about people who have wanted power and riches. But the first rulers who believed they could have it all came from ancient Egypt. These all-powerful rulers were called pharaohs. More than 150 of them reigned over ancient Egypt from about 3000 BCE to 30 BCE. That's about 3,000 years. The Egyptian people believed pharaohs were living gods, and that when they died, they joined all the other gods in heaven. These divine rulers took full advantage of their power. and they had some amazing palaces, temples, and tombs built for them. Have you heard of the 7 wonders of the ancient world? Only one of them still survives today. It's called the Great Pyramid of Giza, and was built as a tomb for one of the earliest pharaohs, called Khufu, who died in 2566 BCE. This giant construction originally towered skywards 147 metres. That's about as high as a 50-storey building, and it's made of more than 2 million blocks of stone, each one weighing as much as a minivan. Experts are still puzzled at how these ancient people could have cut, transported, and hauled into place so many huge stones. They didn't even have wheels. And it was all to create a grave for one man-god. The pharaohs may have believed they were gods, but their power depended on something quite natural, a giant river. The Nile is one of the longest rivers in the world. It flows north from Central Africa into Egypt. Along the way, it picks up lots of fresh, nutrient-rich mud, which it dumps on Egypt's fields when it floods every year. Mud like this is just the right stuff for growing an almost unlimited supply of food, and plentiful food made Egypt rich and the pharaohs powerful. Another natural feature helped the pharaohs hold on to that power. This little strip of fertile land next to the Nile was surrounded by desert, and today we know this huge dry area as the Sahara. This giant desert protected Egypt from invaders. The pharaohs didn't need fancy walls, towers, or castles to keep their country safe. Invaders could only approach in one of 3 ways. They could cross hundreds of miles of desert, or they had to come by sea and wade through the boggy, reedy marshes of the Nile where it flows into the Mediterranean. Or they could come down the Nile from what is now Ethiopia and Sudan. The first 2 ways were well protected by nature, the third less so. Up the river lay Egypt's most regular trading partners, the Nubians, who were sometimes friends and sometimes foe. Egypt imported gold, ivory, copper, incense, and animals from people living in the tropical areas of Central Africa. All of these goods came through Nubian traders. Nubians were also famous as brave warriors who were brilliant shots with a bow and arrow. Nubians came from a very old civilization. As early as 5000 BCE, their ancestors had constructed a ring of stones that may have been the very first structure built to study the stars and planets. This astronomical observatory dates from 2000 years before England's first famous ancient stone circle, Stonehenge. At times, the Egyptians conquered parts of Nubia. At other times, members of the 2 countries' ruling families married, and once Nubia, at the time called Kush, conquered Egypt, their leaders became Egyptian pharaohs for 200 years. Egypt's relationship with its southern neighbours was made easy, and sometimes dangerous, by another accident of nature. The winds in Egypt usually blow from north to south, the opposite direction from the flow of the river. That means people could float downstream in wooden boats. Then, when they wanted to return home, all they had to do was raise a sail and let the wind blow them back upstream. What could be more convenient? Do you believe in life after death? How about your friends and family? If you ask them, I expect you will find some do and some don't. And among those who do, there are lots of different ways to believe in an afterlife. Some people believe in heaven and hell. Others believe in reincarnation. And that's the idea that your spirit comes back to earth in another person or as a different living creature. In the days of ancient Egypt, everyone believed in life after death. And they believed they were going to need to pack some things to take with them when they went to the afterlife. A pyramid showed off how rich and powerful a pharaoh was. but it also provided a safe place to store all the things the pharaoh would need in the next life, and that included his or her body. A rotten body wouldn't be of much use, though, even in a fancy tomb, so the Egyptians invented a way to preserve dead bodies by turning them into mummies. It was a complicated process that could take as long as 70 days. Mummification wasn't just for pharaohs. Anybody in ancient Egypt who could possibly afford it made absolutely sure they were mummified when they died. Some people have even had their pets mummified. The expert who performed mummifications was a special priest called an embalmer. First, the embalmer removed the stomach, intestines, lungs and liver from the body. He then dried them out and placed each in its own container called a canopic jar. Usually, the embalmer removed the brain too. Herodotus, an ancient Greek writer who saw a mummification, wrote that to get the brain out of the skull, the embalmer punched a hole from inside the nose into the brain cavity. He then pulled the brain out with a hook. For centuries, people thought this was how it was done, but now it looks as if he didn't understand what he was seeing. Two American researchers, Bob Breyer and Ron Wade, did an experiment in 1994 that showed brains are too soft for a hook to work. So probably what happened was this. The embalmer stuck a stick through the hole in the back of the nose into the brain and gave it a good stir. Brains are very soft, sort of like yogurt, and when the embalmer stirred hard, the brain turned into liquid and oozed out through the nostrils. The heart was the only organ the embalmer left in the body, where the ancient Egyptians believed that this was the seat of the soul, where people did their thinking and feeling. And they thought that in the next life, the gods would weigh it to judge if the person had lived a good life or a bad life on earth. Once the organs were removed, the embalmer packed the corpse with a special salt called natron to dry it out, and when it was dry, he stuffed the corpse with linen and sawdust, added fake eyes, and wrapped it in strips of cloth. The finished mummy was packed inside a coffin called a sarcophagus and placed in a tomb. In the case of a pharaoh, that tomb might be a pyramid. All around the body was everything that the dead pharaoh could possibly need in the afterlife. Archaeologists have found food, drink, crowns, tableware, weapons, clothes, books, pictures, and even games and toys in the tombs. The tombs of important people contained teams of servants. Luckily, these weren't real people. They were wooden or stone dolls called shabti. Their purpose was to come to the dead souls of their masters or mistresses whenever they needed help. Experts know a lot of this because the ancient Egyptians had writing. They used a system called hieroglyphics. They might have got the idea of writing from the Sumerians, but nobody knows. In any case, they wrote down their brutal rituals in the Book of the Dead. This collection of texts also includes magic spells, which were written and illustrated on scrolls and placed in tombs. The spells were meant to help the souls of the dead pass through the dangers of the underworld and into the afterlife of everlasting joy. You see, writing really does allow us to see inside the minds of people who have been dead for thousands of years. In about 2040 BCE, the capital of Egypt was moved south to a city called Thebes. Here, the burials continued, but there was one important difference. Pharaohs no longer built grand pyramids for all to see. Instead, their tombs were carved into rock underground. They showed off above ground by building temples. Hundreds of underground tombs have been discovered in the Valley of the Kings, Queens and Nobles near Thebes. Remarkably, some have survived almost completely intact. Maybe you've seen a film or read a book about someone finding treasures buried in ancient tombs. Most of these stories are fiction. Here is one that is true. Howard Carter was a British archaeologist who had been working in the Valley of the Kings on and off for 15 years. One day, on the 4th of November 1922, a member of his team found some steps leading into what he hoped was the tomb they had been looking for. The team spent the next 3 weeks very carefully removing the sand and rock that covered the doorway of the tomb. Once they got inside, they saw Carter had been right. They were standing in the burial chamber of boy King Tutankhamun. King Tut had become pharaoh when he was only 9 years old and died when he was 19. A huge hoard of treasure was packed inside the chamber, and the most famous object of all was the boy king's funeral mask, made out of solid gold. It was placed on Tut's face, underneath 3 layers of gold coffins inside a stone sarcophagus. In the end, even the natural defences surrounding ancient Egypt weren't enough to save it, and the last true pharaoh, Cleopatra VII, Philippa, is usually known as simply as Cleopatra. She ruled Egypt mostly by herself, even though she was supposed to be co-pharaoh with her younger brother Ptolemy. When her army was defeated by the Romans, she killed herself rather than surrender. The story is that she took her own life by letting a poisonous snake bite her, but probably she committed suicide some other way, though some think she was murdered. No one knows for sure. Once Cleopatra was gone, independent Egypt was no more.